Hey, everybody. Welcome back to For the Booze. Hello?
Insert it's something better to say than for the booze. I'm trying to think. I got nothing. Welcome back, everybody.
Hello.
We've been gone for a week.
A whole week?
That's normal. I don't know why I said that. I want to come up with something better to say.
Oh, we'll have to figure it out.
I think I just fell short of it. Now, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's all
What
right.
are you gonna do? Anything new?
Nope. Not this
No?
week.
I actually got some yard stuff done today. I felt pretty accomplished. I mean, it was nice.
We're going on a little road trip tomorrow.
Well, there you go. There's your something new.
Well, yeah.
I have a story I want to tell that is new.
Okay.
You've already heard it, but they haven't. And it was the other day. We were sitting in the living room, and our oldest son, came up to me, and he was like, "Dad," or he was running. He was running to his bedroom, which there's like a hallway. I'm not going to get into a complete description of what our house looks like, but there's like a hallway. And he says, "Dad," he says, "Who was that?" And I was like, "Who was what?" And he goes, "I don't know, but they were dark black, and they just ran by." And I was like, "Oh no, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "I don't know." And he just kept looking at the hallway. So finally I got up and I was like, right here, because this is the spot where like I see stuff poke out from behind the wall all the time.
And I know, that's the same spot.
And then he goes, "No, it was this little thing on the floor." Felt died. I was like, "Man, you can't do that to me." But I thought it was pretty fun. I thought I was about to have like a super crazy moment.
It's probably our resident gecko or something.
I thought I was going to have something like jump out of the wall at me, just
that's so funny.
just get me, like it would have been pretty freaky. But
It's funny.
unfortunately, Booze Crew, we have no listener stories finally, and that is a bummer.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yep. So
Sad.
hopefully we'll get some soon.
Yeah.
I have a couple friends I could probably press for them because they owe me some stories.
Oh.
Jonah. Old Jonah. Oh, everybody go over to the Blue Collar Enlightenment show and give him a hard time. Tell him you want to hear his ghost stories.
Yes, please do.
He's got a couple, and he's just slacking on sending them in. So, I mean, he's a podcaster.
Jonah.
He's got a podcast. He could even record them and make them all cool, but we'll work on it. We'll I guess. I don't know what to say. But we're going to move on. And this week, what are we doing, Megan?
We are doing the Bell Witch Cave.
Yes, indeed. This one was, I want to say, John Taylor Falcor requested this one.
Okay.
And if not, whoever it is, I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
I actually did not know a lot about this place.
This is one
I
know
knew
about.
of it, but I didn't know like any specifics. So I'm hoping your story will enlighten me on some history behind
And
the
it will.
cave.
There is going to be a lot of history in this. This is one I did know quite a bit about, but it's probably one of my favorite ones, just because the recorded paranormal activity or the claims of paranormal activity go so far back in time. So I thought it would be a very cool episode to do because I love history.
Yeah, absolutely.
So without our beloved listener stories, I guess today we're just going to go ahead and get right into this one.
Jump right on in.
First, I'd like to start by giving a shout out to the all-powerful Wikipedia.com.
Wikipedia.
Love you guys. Treehugger.com, theculturetrip.com, and just apnews.com, which is pretty sure a local news website.
Okay.
Today's tale starts in the city of Adams in Robertson County, Tennessee. It's near the Kentucky state line, and the population was just 624 at the 2020 census. The first settlers in what is now Adams arrived in the late 18th century. The Red River Baptist Church, one of the first churches founded west of the Cumberland Plateau, was built on the banks of the Red River in 1791. The congregation relocated to its current location on Church Street in 1898. Adams developed in the late 1850s as a station on the Edgefield and Kentucky Railroad, later part of the L&N system. Most of the city's early buildings were destroyed during the Civil War. The city originally incorporated as Red River in 1869, but was renamed Adams Station in honor of James Reuben Adams, who owned much of the land on which the city was built. The name was simplified to just Adams in 1898, and by the late 1880s, Adams was home to several stores, a flour mill, 2 churches, and a school. The city repealed its charter in 1899, but reincorporated in 1908 and incorporated as a city in 1963. Adams is the site of the infamous haunting of the Bell Witch. The first manifestation of the Bell Witch haunting supposedly occurred in 1817 through 1820 on a farm owned by a man named John Bell. Memorial to the Bell family can be found at Bellwood Cemetery. Today, we are talking about that infamous haunting, one of the earliest in recorded history. The legend of the Bell Witch has been passed down through generations in Tennessee for more than 200 years, and today, the story of one of the state's most famous hauntings lives on through the work of the Bell Witch historian and author Pat Fitzhugh. And, according to one descendant of the Bell family, the witch herself remains part of the family's life today.
Wow.
The legendary haunting began with John Bell in an area called Red River, Tennessee, now called Adams, in 1817. While tending his farm, Bell reportedly saw a strange animal, what appeared to be a black dog with a head of a rabbit.
What's that?
In the coming weeks, Bell, his wife Lucy, and his children began to hear pounding noises on the outside of their cabin. These escalated to voices, and eventually, the entity, which could be called a spirit by a local preacher, began to act out physically, throwing pillows across rooms, tugging on children's bedsheets, and physically assaulting Betsy Bell, John Bell's daughter. The family kept the haunting to themselves, perhaps out of fear of retaliation from the staunch Baptist community. Eventually, John Bell shared his experiences with one of his closest friends, and the two went to a local preacher for help. All 3 men swore to keep the seemingly supernatural experiences a secret. But just 2 weeks later, people from Middle Tennessee and Southern Kentucky were traveling to the Bell farm to see the house and the family for themselves, and this made the haunting even worse. It seemed the more people who tried to talk to this thing, the more attention it was paid, the louder it would become, as though it was feeding off of people's fear. At one point, the entity began beating the children and tripping adults with greater intensity. Its voice became clearer, at times low and melodic, and at others a shrill screech. And then it announced its intentions to kill John Bell. Quote, "Mr. Bell is a bad man," unquote, the entity reportedly said. The identity of the entity that reportedly tormented the Bell family is widely disputed. According to legend, the entity itself gave multiple answers about who it was and why it was haunting the family. In one case, it claimed to be the spirit of a Native American whose grave had been disrupted by one of the Bell boys. At a different time, it claimed it was the doing of the Bell family neighbor, Kate Batts. For whatever reason, this story stuck, and the Bell Witch is often referred to as Kate. Kate Batts was an outcast in the Red River community, having little money and doing the majority of the hard physical labor on her family farm for her husband, who was paralyzed in an accident. She had a habit of trying to impress people, making a scene and trying to be the center of attention. Batts strongly denied any connection to the haunting, but the entity began responding to the name Kate. The name Bell Witch is said to have been coined by President Andrew Jackson after he came to the Bell home for an exploratory visit. Some of the Bell children had fought with Jackson when he was a general, and Jackson owned a lot of land not far from the Bell's homestead. According to legend, when Jackson and his men arrived at the Bell farm, the horses refused to cross the property line until a disembodied voice allowed them passage.
Wow.
The entity was largely absent from Jackson's visit, only attacking one of Jackson's men when he commented that the witch feared him because he had a silver bullet called the Witch Tamer in his pistol. Toward the end of the Bell family's initial 4-year ordeal with the Bell Witch, John Bell became seriously ill. Bell, who was approaching his 70s, began struggling to eat, claiming that it was difficult for him to swallow. He suffered frequent episodes that would likely be classified as seizures today. It is believed that John suffered from a disorder of the central nervous system. And according to legend, the witch laughed at Bell's misfortunes. The entity, named Kate, had quite the personality though. Even though most of the time it was talking ugly and cursing, there were times that she would laugh, and it was usually at somebody's misery. John Bell died in 1820 at the age of 70. Legend says John Bell's son, named John Bell Jr., found poison next to his bed. The Bell Witch is believed to have poisoned Bell and reportedly laughed and sang on his deathbed during his funeral. The haunting died down after John's death until the entity turned its attention to Betsy, who was newly engaged to a man named Joshua Gardner.
Yes.
The witch's antics eventually convinced Betsy to break off her engagement to Gardner, who later moved to West Tennessee. He later became a county sheriff and justice of the peace in the Henry County area and ended up in Weakley County, where he and his brother started a railroad. He died a very wealthy man at the age of 84. Now, the Bell Witch disappeared for a time before coming back to say that she would return in 7 years. When she returned to John Bell Jr. in 1828, she is said to have spoken to him for 3 nights about the past, present, and future. She then said she would return to John Bell's most direct descendant in 107 years, in 1935. But no tales from 1935 forward exist as a part of the original legend.
Wow.
Some say she did return, but most people say she never left. She's always been there and always will be, and there's always something going on there. By most accounts, the story of Kate and the Bell family is morbid and horrifying, but according to legend, Kate once saved a young child who became stuck in the Bell Witch Cave while playing with a group of friends. During the children's exploration of the dark cavern, the boy got stuck in a hole and called out for help, and a voice, allegedly of Kate, shouted, quote, "I'll get him out," unquote, and used her invisible hands to pull the boy out of the hole. She then gave the children a brief lesson on safety and disappeared. This event happened during the time she was harassing the Bell family, so it's unclear why she chose to act as a heroine that day. Some narratives claim that the ghost was a male slave from whom Bell had killed in the past, while others say it was someone he had cheated in North Carolina who had come back from beyond the grave for revenge. The most popular theory is that the witch was the neighbor named Kate Batts, who had strong dislike for Bell and his daughter Betsy. The story really entered Southern folklore when Bell died under suspicious circumstances, and people claimed he had been poisoned by the witch, who had been haunting the farm. And there are a number of versions of the tale. Of course, you can listen to another one in this story. As it's told today, most of the story behind the Bell Witch comes from a book written by Martin Van Buren Ingram, more than 70 years after the alleged incidents took place. The book was called An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch. But unfortunately for fans of the supernatural, no one else has been able to authenticate what Ingram wrote. Despite this, the legend of the Bell Witch lives on today in fiction and in fact. The famous low-budget indie horror film, The Blair Witch Project, was partially inspired by the legend, and the movie An American Haunting, starring Donald Sutherland as John Bell, was a more exact retelling of that folklore. Lucy Butler is a direct descendant of John Bell Jr., named after John Bell's wife, Lucy. Now, Lucy Bell, allegedly one of the 3 people the witch actually liked. Butler said that stories of the witch were part of her childhood. Quote, "It It was pretty interesting because things did happen, and we would just naturally turn and say, oh, the Bell Witch did that, unquote. Butler said she believes that the witch is not confined within the limits of the Bell family farm in Adams, but follows her family wherever they go. She said she and her daughter Jennifer have seen the black dog in the original legend, and when Jennifer was growing up, they often saw a giggling girl running around their house at night. Quote, I was thinking that might have been the Bell Witch, but the sweet side of her, unquote. The little girl would play with Jennifer's toys, and the family dog was not afraid of her, Butler said. Quote, she stayed. She would come out at night. She was sweet and giggled. She would watch over Jennifer, unquote. Not everyone in Butler's family believed in the witch. Her grandfather, a Methodist preacher, refused to allow one word about Kate to be spoken in his presence.
What?
But Butler said she thinks this could be because of the negative experience he might have had with the entity. Quote, I can go through the bad people in my family and see things that have happened and why. And when I see the good things, Butler said, but because the witch, Kate, whoever you want to call her, she did have a good side to the people she liked, unquote. Butler said the entity did not like her father. He was a smooth-talking, good-looking actor in Memphis who had happened to have some alleged involvement with the Florida Mafia. Butler recalls one incident that happened when she was a child just before her father was about to host a gathering at their home. Butler's father had purchased a stereo system, a considerable luxury in the 1960s. Butler said she walked downstairs to find her living room filled with thousands of crickets marching toward the music room, where they climbed into the stereo system and ruined it.
What?
Quote, I think she punished the people that needed to be punished. But I also think she took care of the ones that she liked, unquote. She also said there's probably a lot of people that don't believe in her, and that's fine. Everybody's got their personal opinion. I just believe it. I'm sure the stories I heard growing up helped, but I saw a lot of things. Things happened. I was there.
Wow.
So she was a direct descendant of the Bell family.
Yeah.
And she is very convinced that there were strange happenings.
It's definitely something.
So there are, I wanted to stay with the most, I don't want to say relevant either. One of the words I want to use here. There are some things that are left out of this story only because they are ones that could never be substantiated. They are never ones that could be backed by fact. But if it's not in what your story has to offer, I'm going to bring it up at the end, because if I don't, I feel like people who know about the Bell Witch Cave will be mad at me. But I will bring it up.
Okay.
But it's very out there. It really just depends on how far you are in as a believer into the paranormal. But the thing that really excites me about this story is that this story started in 1817.
Yeah.
Okay, over 200 years ago.
Long time ago.
And this witch has been reportedly being active for these 200-something years in one form or fashion or the other.
That's a long time.
I really find it, as a paranormal lover, like, I love this. I do. I love this because it's such an old story. Didn't come from YouTube.
Right.
You know, it didn't come from the 90s.
Absolutely,
you know,
yeah.
There were no phone tricks or... it wasn't the popular thing to do. Like, these people didn't want people to know. Like, they were scared. They were afraid that their local church that they attended were going to find out and shun them from the community.
Yeah, and I think that's what you find with, like, most originating ghost stories from back in those times. Like, it was such a taboo thing, and it really was a taboo thing up until, like, the 90s, really, when it, like, kind of
that's
boomed.
not fair. You have to go back to, like, the 50s, okay? The 50s, I think, when Ed and Lorraine Warren started doing their thing. Like, there were other paranormal people before them. There are lots of weird stories from, like, the late 1800s and people doing, like, table tapping and all this other weird stuff. But I think Ed and Lorraine Warren were really, depending on how you feel, well, it actually doesn't matter how you feel about them. Regardless of that, they really helped push everything to a point to where when they were old or older, whatever, sorry, listeners. But by the time Ghost Hunters came out, it was like everybody was ready for that mainstream paranormal television show.
Yeah, but back when they got started, I mean, it was still a very taboo thing, and
It was.
people like looked at them like, "What are you doing?"
I just wanted to give them their credit for being the ones who brought it really to the forefront, because there were lots of people before them that were doing weird. Like, I always go back to the table tapping, and I mean, it's already been proven that these people were the ones tapping the table. They weren't talking to anybody. I mean, I'm sure there are accounts that maybe there were spirits doing it, but for the most part, it was a hoax. And there have always been psychics and stuff like that, but the Warrens are really the ones who brought the majority of this into a point of pop culture where somebody else could push it over the edge. And I mean, ultimately, it blew the Warrens up too, right? Now we have paranormal in the pop culture that is so relevant that we made movies about the Blair Witch Cave, or the Bell Witch Cave, and movies based on it, and we can talk about it on a podcast and stuff like that, So, yeah, these super old hauntings, I love them. They are my favorite.
I think they have such a thing about them. I was going to use a better word, but I couldn't think of it. Like, these people had to have been just terrified.
Scared
for
out of their
one,
minds.
having this happen. And then for two, like, what are people going to think about this? And how are other people going to feel about, like, what happens to us in our house, and like, will we act differently because of it? And like, there's just so much that goes into it that's honestly terrifying.
I think another fun fact about it was that Andrew Jackson had been there, and
I know, that was really crazy.
Like, kind of trash talked the entity, which I thought was kind of fun, But it's 1817. I mean, other than somebody handwriting it, I mean, it's hard to really come up with solid facts about this.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't write out. There's a whole big part of the story that I left out that will be brought up in this show.
Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and jump on over to what Megan has to say, because I'm sure it's so good.
Oh, thanks.
So good. And away you go, Megan. And now, time for an ad break.
And now, back to our show.
And just for the record, I know I said Kentucky in the beginning. I'm only human. I caught back up, though. I got to Tennessee at some point, so.
Whoops.
Grill me online, folks. Grill me online. I'm only human.
So a special thanks this week to spooktea.com, denofgeek.com, and tennessean.com. For those of us that live in the U.S., we know that Tennessee is a beautiful southern state. From the music of Nashville to the cave systems and rich Native American culture, it is truly an amazing place to visit. Something very strange is going on these days and nights inside the Bell Witch Cave in Tennessee. In 1986, photographer Bill Wilson and David Gerard learned when they went to Adams with plans to spend a night in the cave where, legend has it, the spirit of Kate Bates resides. It could be what they thought would be a good story for Halloween. But they didn't spend the night. Instead, they were frightened away from the cave by something. But what that was, they had no idea. Maybe they were scared away by overactive imaginations, freshly fueled with stories of ghost lore. Or maybe they were bamboozled by the cave owners, who are trying to turn it into a commercially successful venture. Or maybe they did indeed encounter an otherworldly spirit. Maybe, just maybe, the witch actually does exist. At first appearance, the cave seemed unspectacular, just a hole in a cliff near the Red River. After a tour with 5 other participants, the guides and others in the group eventually left the cave. Left behind with sleeping bags in hand, they were given permission to spend the night. even after being cautioned by two brothers, saying they would never sleep in the cave.
No way.
The men did not heed their warning. The men began to say things like, "Big deal," and the other would go on to say, "It's a grunge hole," seemingly unafraid of the night ahead of them. They were in the first of the two quote-unquote rooms, or large open spaces just inside the cave that cuts 50 yards into the cliff and is lit with electric lights. They intended to sleep that night on flat rocks near an empty grave where a child used to be buried. Quote, "You know," end quote, said Bill as he surveyed the surroundings. "It's not the witches in this cave that I'm afraid of. Do you know what a brown recluse spider looks like?" End quote. He pointed his flashlight to one of the pitted rock walls in the first room. It was covered with the deadly spiders, including one the size of a $50, hanging exactly in the middle of the webs. Quote, "I don't know how we can sleep in here with those things," Bill said. "They can kill you." End quote. It was at this point they heard the first noise. It wasn't very loud at first. Just a new sound added to the relative silence of the cave. It came from the direction of the second room, 30 yards deeper in the cave. The men peered into the darkness and fell silent. Then, the sound came again, louder this time. Raspy, deep sounds, like an unwavering groan, or a big electric buzzer with a weak battery that lasted a full 5 seconds. With the sound came several loud thumps, a sound difficult to make on solid rock. Quote, "I have never heard a noise like that in a cave before," end quote, Bill said. He was also a member of the National Speleological Society, who has explored miles of caves from all shapes and sizes. Very comfortable in caves, he knows what they sound like. And this was not a sound he was familiar with.
I don't know.
Then, there was a third growl, like before, but this time louder than their own voices and increasingly intensifying. At the moment, one of the men yelled, "Let's go!" ending their night inside the cave. Later, the Ghost Adventures crew would visit the caves. Season 10, Episode 5, Zach Bagans, Aaron Goodwin, and the rest of the Ghost Adventures crew would head to the town of Adams to investigate the site of the Bell Witch Cave, home to an entity so powerful it is said to have allegedly killed someone. After loading up their gear to head to Tennessee, the Ghost Adventures team met up with Walter Kirby, the owner of the property on which the infamous Bell Witch Cave resides. According to Walter, the farm he now owns was once the home to the Bell family, who famously experienced a haunting between 1817 and 1820, more than 200 years ago. The story of the haunting is widely considered one of America's most well-known and well-documented, and has been chronicled by countless writers over the centuries. The first written account of paranormal activity at the Bell Farm was written on June 6, 1819, by a man passing through the area. After stopping for the night to rest at the Bell Farm, the man wrote a letter that the family sat together in wait of a dangerous witch, reading their Bibles to ward off the demon. In other accounts, the family reported seeing strange animals around their property, like dogs with rabbit heads, which would arrive on the property before the witch appeared to them. Later, the family experienced loud knocking noises, which seemed to have no source, no matter how often they investigated. The youngest son, Richard Bell, kept a detailed diary of the hauntings, which included accounts of the entity eventually coming into the family home. According to Richard's diary, the so-called Bell Witch took a special interest in the youngest daughter of the family, Betsy Bell, frequently entering her room to hit, slap, pinch and pull at her. To protect the family and Betsy William Porter, John Bell's son-in-law, attempted to catch and kill the witch, wrapping a shadowy figure in a blanket and trying to throw it in the fire. William Porter III, the heroic man's direct descendant, who still resides near Adams, Tennessee, was reportedly told that the attempt had failed because the witch had become unbearably heavy the closer and closer he stepped to the fire. Although Betsy became the frequent target of the Bell witch's rage, it would be the patriarch of the family, John Bell, who would suffer the worst. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell was found dead in his bed by his family. Beside him was a vial containing a mysterious substance, and as the family examined it, they heard the voice of the Bell Witch say, quote, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him," end quote. Some residents of the area believe that the Bell Farm and the Bell Witch Cave, which exist on the northern end of the property, was built upon ancient Native American burial grounds, and that the angry spirits had retaliated against the family for disturbing the remains. One of the Bell children allegedly had dug into the burial ground, discovering a human skull, which they eagerly brought home to show the family. One of the teeth came loose from the skull and slipped between the cracks of the floorboards where it couldn't be retrieved, cementing the spirits attached to the home and the family. Though this could be explained, the specific haunting of the Bells or other visitors to the cave, even some recently, have experienced strange phenomena or became gravely ill after removing rocks or pebbles from the natural cavern. According to the current owner of the property, they frequently receive rocks in the mail with a specific request for them to return to the cave, often including some warning that they, a family member, or a friend had been injured or gotten extremely sick after taking it. Late in the evening, with the sun fully set in the dark sky, the crew set out for the Bell Witch Cave to try to contact the infamous Bell Witch. Zach explained that the crew had brought along trigger objects, which might elicit a response from the entity. In this case, the trigger object was a person, William Porter III, the direct descendant of William Porter, the man who is said to have attempted to kill the Bell Witch. Before the team entered the cave, one of the camera and mic stands they had set up before beginning the investigation caught a strange, echoing voice. After analysis of the sound, the voice seems to be saying, quote, "Listen to me," end quote. Startled but excited, the team started the investigation by sending William Porter into the cave all alone. The plan was to emit a very low infrared sound, which might be able to trap into the frequency of the spiritual world hidden within the rocks of the cave. As the team played the sound, lights began to appear inside the cave, seemingly responding to the vibrations of the infrasound. Next, William, equipped with a camera and a hard hat, entered the cave. Deep in the cave, William asked for the spirit in the cave to take his hand. In response, a rock falls, or is thrown, deep within the cave. The more William spoke, the more rocks began to fall, and at a rapid rate, until suddenly, William's audio picks up a strange grunting sound, which happens to sync with responses from some of the crew's equipment. Next, Billy headed into the cave and discovered that some of their equipment was flashing frantically to indicate the presence of a strong energy field. As the crew began asking questions, their equipment began to flash in response. Having spent quite some time in the cave, the whole crew began to feel physical effects of the extreme electromagnetic fields. Wanting to try to further connect to the spirits within the cave, Aaron began to put himself into a meditative state. As the rest of the crew filmed him with thermal technology, a cold, blue mass began to form around Aaron's body, and what looked like a head with 2 horns seemed to appear behind him. Immediately upon leaving the meditative state, the strange blue mass disappeared. Then, Billy began to experience severe back pain and suddenly became emotional at the thought of the desecrated burial site they may have been standing on. Distraught, Billy quickly exited the cave, following the others who were also experiencing similar levels of emotional distress. After an hour or so of recovering, the crew decided to split up. Zach and Aaron locked themselves into the Bell Witch cave, intent on catching the Bell Witch. As the pair traveled to the cave, the openings became narrower and more difficult to navigate. Not having encountered anything, Zach and Aaron turned back, no longer able to walk in the dank and waterlogged depths of the cave. Billy and Jay, in the meantime, traveled to the hidden gravesite of John Bell, which sits on the very spot the Bell family home once stood, and where John was positioned by the Bell Witch. Though they sat for some time, they captured no EVPs of the Bell Witch or any other entities. Finally, nearing the end of the night, Zach asked for the Bell Witch to show herself in the form of a ball of light. Suddenly, captured on one of Zach's cameras, he saw a ball of light shoot towards him through the darkness. Strangely, this was the only ball of light to appear throughout the entire time they spent in the cave. Even more shocking, Zach's recorder picked up a voice at that exact moment. The light sped past him, clearly saying, "Here I come." Based on the findings of the crew, they were able to conclude that the area is indeed a hotbed of paranormal activity. Despite the torturous hauntings of the Bell family above ground ending 200 years ago, the continued reports and evidence of hauntings within the cave suggests that there could be a spirit or spirits residing in its depths. Is the spirit within the same spirit that killed John Bell? Is it the Bell Witch or some other wandering spirit disturbed by the comings and goings of tourists eager to view what was once a sacred place? We may never know the answers to all our questions, but the hauntings, whoever the spirits are, will continue to call the Bell Witch Cave their home.
What a good story. Okay, so right after I have to get into it, the thing I was talking about earlier was in your story. And it was the story of how they tried to capture the witch, and they threw the blanket on her, and they had these plans to throw her in the fire, but every time the closer they would get to the fire, the heavier she would become. And I think eventually they were just like, yeah, forget this, and they let her go.
I mean, how do you go about like trying to wrap something, an entity, we'll say, instead of just a spirit, an entity?
Well, you gotta remember, she's not a ghost per se.
I mean, I get that.
She's a witch.
So an entity.
Yeah,
but like, how do you try and wrap it and drag it? So,
well,
I mean,
they
that's
waited.
Crazy to
they
me.
waited for her to show up, is how the story goes. They sat and waited for her, and when she, I guess, appeared in the room, like Harry Houdini, they threw a blanket on her and tried to torture her up. I don't really know.
Like Alakazam, here I am, I guess.
Like ninja, like a poof ball. Ninja. I don't know, but I mean, I've heard the story a bunch of times, and
Yeah.
I mean, I want it to be true. I do want it to be true, but
And it's crazy to think like these things that happened so long ago have been passed down from generation to generation
For over
to
200
generation
years.
for forever.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot. And I would believe maybe something happened at some point. I'm not getting into the is it real portion yet, but there's just parts of it that I don't think I'll ever be able to believe unless I was there.
Right.
You know, and that's not me saying that nothing happened. It's just me saying that it is so outlandish that I would never be able to be sure.
Right.
Never.
And like we touch on parts of the story, and there are other parts to this story,
there's
other
always
stories that intermingle in with it. So if you're ever interested, I mean, you can absolutely go and like look more stuff up. I don't know. This story is just crazy to me.
There's always more to a story. I mean, we don't really have a time limit on our show, but we do try to stay under an hour. And while I'm sure we still have to talk more, and I don't know, some things like I'm just not comfortable putting in as factual or even entertaining the fact. I don't know. I'm just, for me, it's just, go read the book. Shit, if you want to know everything, go read the book. We can't fit it all within an hour. So.
But I think too that like the numerous amounts of stories get passed down like that is how legends and lores are carried on.
For sure.
And it makes them stronger the longer they go, you know?
I agree.
And 200 years is a really long time.
That's a very long time. And now we're over 200 years at this point.
At this point, yeah.
I find it very amazing though, again, that the descendants all say, you know, they still have activity with her.
Yeah.
I think I think that really is amazing.
Yeah. It's so crazy.
That's a lot. I did go online and I did find some EVPs of the Bell Witch Cave.
Yay.
This video that I'm going to play it's almost 6 minutes long. We'll see how long we let it play.
Okay.
If it is all the EVP, we'll let it roll.
We'll just let it ride.
We'll let it ride so everybody can hear what goes down here. So are you ready to check this out?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Can you please tell us your name?
I know I asked last time, but can you maybe throw something out? No one did that, right?
No.
No one threw that rock, did they?
No. Why are you here? Can you give us a sign? Do you have something you would like to tell us or let it be known?
You seem to like to throw rocks. Can you throw another one?
Now that rock hit very close to me.
Was that
Sounded like it was in this room.
Yeah, are you in this room right now?
I mean, it was thrown into this room.
Yeah. Are you in the back? Do you not like us in here?
Yeah, I thought you might give him ideas of throwing us out.
He seems to like to throw rocks, yeah.
I'm getting freaked out. Like, it's not comfortable
They
here
all
anymore.
like,
Hey, guys, I'm getting really freaked out. Like, I'm not comfortable at all anymore. No, I mean, like, before I was fine, and now it's just, it's a weird
Why are you
vibe.
uncomfortable?
Almost over. It's been 2 minutes. We're not here to hurt you. We're not here to bother you. We just want to talk to you.
There's no need to be afraid of us.
We would like to help you if we can.
Is there anything we can do?
Doesn't seem like it changes anything.
My arm is so cold right now. Yeah. I feel like there's somebody behind me.
Would you, would you like to throw another rock? You seem to like to.
Please stop that.
No more rocks for you? What happened here? Are you the little boy?
Oh my God.
No, I didn't do that.
I swear if you did Michael, I'm going to kill you when we get out of
I did not do
here.
any of that. Was that you?
I did your little boy's voice twice earlier. Well, it wasn't a voice, it's more like a yell. Like a kid playing. And those type of kids just come from
Wait, you're not down there, are you? You're up there, aren't you?
up where?
Up where this guy's sitting.
Arms are starting to twitch.
Are you moving now? Would you like to say anything at all?
Thank you for talking with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
You get lonely often?
Flash a picture right there. Take a picture right there.
I can't. Mine's on video. Somebody start taking pictures while we ask questions.
Yeah, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna ask some questions. You can go in front of the bright light.
Is it okay if we take your picture?
Yeah, that's what we're basically asking. Can we take your picture? We're gonna flash one right on top of this big rock. You've been here a while. You know what it is. No one's throwing rocks, right?
No.
Are you sure you'll be?
Why, did you hear another rock? I didn't hear anything.
No, I didn't hear anything. I'm trying to hear none of you guys are throwing them. This kid is.
We're kind of wrapped around each other right now.
Yeah.
Hey, let me get your camera right now.
Who, mine?
So yeah,
Wow. I mean, I know she was whispering through some of that.
she was, but
at the beginning,
I don't-
she was not.
I don't think that some of that was her. I think the earlier stuff was not her. But by the way, this is, I believe it's pronounced Marie Amethyst, all one word, over on YouTube. They have 7 subscribers, but this video has 15,000 views.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, you could definitely hear that rocket. I mean, we weren't even watching it. So just like
Yeah,
you
we were just
listeners,
listening.
like we were just listening, and you could definitely hear that rocket. You could hear, something like almost thud off in the distance. And
I heard voices.
That very first whisper was absolutely not her.
I definitely heard voices.
Yeah.
But what I will say is this video is from 14 years ago,
Whoa.
which means this was before Ghost Adventures went
Yeah.
there. And they had some of the same exact activity.
Wow.
Think about that.
Yeah.
They had the rock fall, the voices. I know I heard voices in there.
Yeah.
I know I did.
For sure. I mean, it was a little fuzzy bit of sound, but that beginning was absolutely 100% a voice.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't even whispering at that part. I mean, she was speaking normally.
Yeah, she was speaking loud and clear. So, I mean, hey, if you want to go back and listen to it a few times, knock yourself out. I thought that was pretty cool. I'm sorry if it was too long for some of you guys, but it is what it is. I wanted to get something good on here.
I mean, I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it, too. Some of it was creeping me out a little bit. But I think we should move on to the time and the question.
That question?
That question. Well, other Steven. What do you think, Meg? This is a pretty big one. Don't piss 200 years of people off here.
I think that it could absolutely be true. I'm a full believer in all kinds of things, but like witches and things like that, I do believe in witches. And back then, it was, I think, more than it is now for someone to say that they're a witch. And I think the practices lead back that long, and that could definitely have been a thing. And now, is that what resides in this cave? I don't know. But there's something. I mean, 14 years from one thing to the next. I mean, not 14 years total, but like that was a long time in between it being on TV and that clip we just listened to. And so many similar things happened.
I think it would have been about 4 or 5 years, maybe.
Yeah. And so, I'm going to say yes.
Nice. I think I agree. I think it's haunted, but unfortunately, I don't think that the story of them trapping the witch and trying to drag her into the fire are even remotely true. I think it was a fun fire pit story back in the day.
Fair enough.
I do believe that there was activity. Who it is, though, I would put my money on Native American, something to that effect, because this lady, Kate Batts, she was just a normal lady.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of people nowadays that practice witchcraft and stuff, and it's not... I've never heard of anybody being able to transport themselves into your house.
Right.
Or, I mean, maybe somebody could have poisoned the guy for sure.
I mean, how
happened.
are you just going to pull a random neighbor into it? You know what I'm saying?
Well, they didn't get along.
Still.
Yeah, but they didn't get along, so they probably wanted her out.
I mean, back then,
They would have killed her.
We went to a torture museum and saw
Yeah,
a scale that women would step on. It'd be like, if you weighed over like 96 pounds, they were like, oh, you're a witch.
Yeah.
Like, what?
You're dead.
So, I mean, back then to call people witches was super common.
Yeah, I think what we saw at the torture museum might have been a little bit before this time. I think being called a witch in the 1800s, especially the early 1800s, while they weren't really tossing you in a river with rocks attached to you, I still think people would have came and killed you.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it was as medieval as it once was. You know what I mean?
Right.
I want to believe the tales. I do, because I think they're cool, man, and they make such a good story. But
and they're so different from your
regular,
normal, everyday stuff. So like,
they're cool.
I don't know.
They are definitely cool, but I believe there's activity. I still believe there's activity to this day, which is why I think I don't believe it's the neighbor. I truly believe it's whatever was on the land beforehand.
Yeah.
Because that story of the boys going out and, accidentally or not, but desecrating the grave, coming home with a tooth and dropping it, that's been substantiated. So that happened.
Something big.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean,
now could the land have been cursed by a witch before? And she was like, I'll see you in like 100 and some odd years. Bye. Yeah,
well, and that's the thing. It's like the Enfield haunting and stuff where it's very vocal, or what is his name? There's the weasel. I can't remember his name now. But there's this tale of this weasel in a family, but he was like the spirit inside of a weasel. And it was all weird. It's a fun story. But in my opinion, it's just a story.
Yeah.
They're just cool things to attach to something already going on to rope people in harder. But I do think that if you go to the Bell Witch Cave and you're looking for it, I think you'll find it.
Activity of some kind.
I think you'll find
no matter who it or what it is.
I think if you're looking for it and you're calling it out and you're asking it, I think you'll find it.
I agree. I think so too. I think there is something there. Something.
There are tons.
We'll just say something.
There are tons of accounts of activity. Some people not looking for it. Some people looking for it.
Right.
Some people thinking they were hot shit, going in there and finding out they weren't. So,
like our photographers from my story.
Exactly.
They were like, nope.
That story goes on a little deeper, but I mean, we got the gist of it.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to be big tough guys and go in there, and they found out very quickly that it was a bit scarier than they thought. So it's going to be cool. Yeah, I think we're headed towards the end here. So
okay,
where can they find you?
Find us on Instagram at _for_the_booze_podcast, and on Facebook, For the Booze.
You can find us on Twitter at For The Booze, and you can also please send in your listener stories and suggestions. I don't know if you noticed, but we didn't read one today.
We did not.
We don't have any.
So if you know of a family member that has had something maybe happen to them and you want to ask, hey, can you tell me your story?
Anything.
Could I send it somewhere?
Just give us something to read.
Something. Or if you just want to say hi, that's cool too.
And don't forget, Mondays at 5 p.m. on Twitter Spaces, me, sometimes Megan, but not often, and Rick over at Maximum Oddities podcast, we do a space called Paranormal Oddities where you can come in and talk to us and a bunch of other great people, other podcasters and stuff about the paranormal. I mean, it's a pretty relaxed environment, so we do joke around a lot. And it's fun.
It is fun.
You should come check it out.
Yeah.
And don't forget, please rate us wherever you listen. 5 stars, and the rest is up to you. Say whatever you want. Really don't care. Just give us 5 stars. We are just trying to get this podcast ahead a little bit. We'd like to be able to do a little bit more and involve the listeners a bit. So, yeah, there's going to be that. So, what do you think, Bing? I think it's time.
I think it is. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. We appreciate you very much.
And we'll be back on to the next one, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.